Let's turn our attention up first to the economics that surround Liz Truss, and that has landed her slam dunk in trouble because her retreat for the moment continues. The British Prime Minister has rolled back her proposed reduction of corporate tax next year, which means that Britain as a country is going to get an extra £18 million in tax revenues. This U-turn that has happened comes after she has fired her Finance Minister, Kwasi Kwarteng. Truss, on her part, says that she wants to deliver a low-tax economy. Listen into what she said.
Global economic conditions are worsening due to the continuation of Putin's appalling war in Ukraine. And on top of this, debt was amassed helping people through the COVID pandemic. But it is clear that parts of our mini-budget went further and faster than markets were expecting. So the way we are delivering our mission right now has to change. We need to act now to reassure the markets of our fiscal discipline. I have therefore decided to keep the increase in corporation tax that was planned by the previous government. This will raise £18 billion per year. It will act as a down payment on our full medium-term fiscal plan, which will be accompanied by a forecast from the independent OBR. We will do whatever is necessary to ensure debt is falling as a share of the economy in the medium term.
It is true what Liz Truss is saying, because as far as the markets are concerned, they were in turmoil ever since that mini-budget has been announced. Whether that was valid or not is a million-dollar question. But earlier today, I explained the entire political crisis beyond the economics of it that are clearly playing out in the world's financial capital, and Liz Truss is in trouble. What exactly has happened that has put her in this spot of bother? Here's the explainer. And yes, it's confirmed. The free trade agreement between India and the UK is not going to be signed by Diwali. But really, that's not all. The failures of Trussonomics continue. The newly appointed British Prime Minister, whose days in power have been compared to that of the shelf life of lettuce, faces more and more trouble. The Conservative Party, who just days ago elected her to power, is now looking for alternatives. And reports are suggesting that there is a revolt that is brewing, with one poll suggesting that almost half of their supporters believe the Tories chose the wrong candidate. Truss has her back against the wall right now. She's battling to survive. Strategic retreats are all she has in her arsenal. So Kwasi Kwarteng has been sacked after being summoned to court. The Chancellor of the Exchequer had to cut short his trip to Washington. After all, it was his name on the mini-budget that brought the Truss government to its knees. So what was this so-called mini-budget? Well, in short, it was designed to keep Britain at a 2.5% annual growth rate. And that included cuts on income tax as well as stamp duty. Her most controversial cut on the top tax bracket has already been rolled back, and this after economists have been trashing it. Markets, of course, had a mini meltdown because of it. Well, now Kwarteng is out. He will be replaced by Jeremy Hunt. Chris is also being replaced as the Chief Secretary to the Treasury by Ed Arger. Now, Britain's opposition has not let this opportunity go by. So the Labour Party's Rachel Reeves is saying that firing the Chancellor is just not enough, and she wants Truss to step down too. Edward Davey has gone one step ahead. The Liberal Democrat leader wants general elections at this time. So it's quite clear that Truss's government is in serious trouble. It remains to be seen how long she can really fight on. And that is the big question. How long will she manage to stay as the Prime Minister of the country right now, when the entire financial system, as far as Britain is concerned, is really going through a very tough time? Let's get perspective on this. Alastair Newton is joining us. He's co-founder and director at Alavan Business Advisory. Great to have you with us this evening. Do tell us, from the face of it, a low-tax economy doesn't sound so bad, but the timing perhaps was all wrong. What exactly do you think has landed Liz Truss's economic package? Was it fundamentally so flawed, do you believe?
I think one of the problems with Liz Truss is she thinks she's modelling herself on Margaret Thatcher. Had she studied Thatcher's history as Prime Minister more carefully she would have discovered that although the lady famously was not for turning, the lady also famously remarked on more than one occasion that you cannot buck the market. And in the early Thatcher years, from 1979 onwards, when Sir Geoffrey Howe, a very, very good politician indeed, was Chancellor of the Exchequer, she was very, very careful indeed only to roll out policies which would be well accepted by the markets. And Truss's biggest mistake of all so far has been to believe that she can buck the market when she actually could not. Now, I think why we've seen things come to a head right now is in part because of actually what is quite a courageous move by Andrew Bailey at the Bank of England in refusing to extend the Bank of England's emergency bond buying scheme beyond today. I think that has effectively forced the retreat now, because clearly without that bond buying scheme in place, which was majorly instrumental in restabilizing markets, we were likely to see markets going into at least semi-meltdown again next week. Beyond that, I would say that most of Truss's mistakes are actually political rather than her, frankly, somewhat limited understanding of economics and her failure to understand financial markets. The reality is that the vast majority of her party does not support her. In the first round of the vote amongst the Parliamentary Conservative Party members, fewer than 50 of her fellow Conservative MPs voted for her. Less than 2/3 voted in the final round. She does not enjoy the confidence of her parliamentary party, and therefore she has to retreat.
Well, she clearly is doing that. And do you think that is going to calm the markets? Also, since you mentioned the Bank of England, Alastair, I want to also understand if you think that they will continue with the emergency bond buying program if market conditions actually demand it. They are trying to put this to an end, but will they be able to?
You know, I've known Andrew Bailey for many years, and although he does get quite a lot of criticism in the press, and he's not always been totally sure-footed, particularly when he was in charge of the regulatory side. He is a very, very competent central banker, and he will certainly be on the lookout for anything which could remotely resemble systemic risk. And I do believe that if we do find ourselves in a situation again where the UK is not only vulnerable to systemic risk itself, but likely to cause contagion into other economies. And we've heard this pretty clearly from the IMF this week, let's face it. I think the Bank of England would certainly act again. But I don't think it's going to act at the moment simply because a number of pension fund managers are shouting for more help. I think it will want to see some definitive evidence that that help is necessary. There's only so many times that the Bank of England can step in. In the end, the government has got to sort out fiscal policy. And I don't think that the retreat on corporation tax, which is actually relatively easy, because if you talk to corporate Britain, which clearly Truss has not, a cut in corporation tax from 25 to 19% is not a high priority among business executives in the UK. But I don't think this is necessarily going to be the last retreat. It wouldn't surprise me at all, for example, if in Parliament, which will be in session next week, she finds herself being forced to target much more narrowly the big energy bailout, which was agreed at the start of her term as Prime Minister. Keep in mind that that's across the board. It's everybody. It's going to houses who really don't need that degree of government subsidy. So I think we're going to have to see more fiscal consolidation relative to Trussonomics to date before we see markets satisfied and before we see the Parliamentary Conservative Party satisfied.
We'll have to wait for that. But meanwhile, Manish Singh is joining us from Crossbridge Capital. He's joining us on the phone line. Manish, good evening to you. And we're looking at the economy as Britain right now. It's looking set to slow down rather sharply. Surging inflation is hitting households. It's forcing the Bank of England to raise interest rates rather quickly. And we have the energy crisis as well. What do you expect the economy of Britain to do in light of the troubled spot that Truss finds herself in?
Right. So if you look at the numbers, and I know we have talked about the IMF forecast before, UK is still set to be the fastest growing nation this year in 2022. So I think a lot of things that you're seeing in the news, a lot of it is politics. Is what you are seeing. We have a system here where, because we have a parliamentary form of system, we elect a group of people, and from therein you get the leader or the prime minister. And the Prime Minister, it seems, does not have support of the parliamentary party. She does have support of the members, which is why she got elected, but she does not have support of the parliamentary party. The problems you are seeing is more about politics, and that is dominating. If you look at the underlying, and let's talk about sterling. So when the mini budget came, the sterling was at 1.09. The sterling now is 1.13. So has it the sterling? No. I mean, if he has, then the evidence is not in the data. And I think a lot of things you're hearing from people and experts, it's all more about politics rather than real numbers. If you're talking about bond deals, the bond deals have risen, yes, that's correct, and interest rate is rising, that's also correct. If you look at the currency, Japanese yen is doing worse than sterling. So look through the
Manish, I'm afraid the audio quality is not the greatest on this line, and we'll have to repatch it. But for the moment, we're running out of time. But indeed, this is trouble that is not leaving Britain behind anytime soon, and we'll have to keep watching the situation as it develops. Thanks very much for joining us, Manish Singh. And Alice